So in 2012, the New York Times ran an article on a woman named Linda Brentmeyer, and she was testifying on Capitol Hill and urging Congress to end the travesty of sending juveniles to adult jails and prison. Her 17-year-old son from Texas had been incarcerated for arson. In prison, he was raped repeatedly and later hanged himself in his cell. The scenario was predictable. Congressional findings in the Prison Rape Elimination Act of 2003 posited that juveniles were 5 times as likely to be sexually assaulted in an adult rather than juvenile facilities, often within their first 48 hours of incarceration. Youth advocacy groups report that juveniles housed in adult facilities are 36 times more likely to commit suicide. The political magazine, The Atlantic, reported that nearly 200,000 minors are jailed in U.S. prisons. About 10,000 of these minors are held in adult prisons rather than juvenile detention facilities. Minors age 14 can be tried as an adult for a felony, and on average will be released between the ages 21 and 25. My main claim tonight is that the adult prison environment negatively affects the rehabilitation of juvenile offenders. I have found 3 points of evidence to back the claim. My first point is that these juvenile offenders are more likely to reoffend once released from prison. The same juvenile offenders are lost in the legal system due to lack of rehabilitation programs, and upon release, they have difficulty readjusting to life. For my first point, that juvenile offenders are more likely to reoffend in adult facilities, has to do with the fact that trauma. Adult prisons are not safe for juvenile offenders, and the Prison Rape Elimination Act of 2003, commonly known as the PREA, is meant to keep minors out of the same showers and facilities at the same times as adults. Often, jailhouses go one of 2 ways with this rule. They either intermix the adult inmates with the juvenile inmates, and that's how unreported assault, due to the imbalance of ratios, happen. The other is to take the precautionary measure. They separate the inmates in a single cell for 23 hours a day with little lighting. This causes mental issues, paranoia, and often leads to suicide. Reported by the CDC, 34% of juvenile inmates are likely traumatized or hyperviolent because of their time spent in adult prison, which makes them often lash out and reoffend upon release. My second point, that the juveniles are lost in the legal system, is because of no education and no therapy. Jessica Leahy from The Atlantic, a journalist, she wrote that these children lose more than their freedom when they enter adult prisons. They lose out on educational and psychological benefits offered by juvenile detention facilities. According to YouthJusticeCampaign.org, a survey of adult facilities found that 40% of jails provided no educational services at all. Only 11% provided special education services, and a mere 7% provided vocational training. These juvenile convicts become overlooked, which builds towards the previous trauma I spoke of, and often leads to my third point, which is the difficulty of readjusting after prison. Juvenile inmates released from adult prison often have difficulty forming habits and different desires from the ones in which they entered the prison with. David Stankiewicz stated from his article in the Brigham Young Pre-Law Review that most juveniles already in prison come from disadvantaged backgrounds, and a prison term on their record will only hurt their prospects further down the road, making it more difficult for them to get employment, gain trust of others, or even apply for a loan. This creates an unproductive society member. In summary, the consequences of condemning juvenile offenders to adult prisons is detrimental to the overall rehabilitation of the juvenile prisoner. Imprisoning youth convicts is meant to correct the behavior of the offender so that they may once again partake in society productively. Adult prisons do not comply to the needs of the youth, rather leaving the convict traumatized and most likely unsuccessful in future endeavors. Therefore, the adult prison environment negatively affects the rehabilitation of juvenile offenders. Thank you.
Right, the example you present at the beginning gives us some reason why this is significant and important to listen to. I thought that that was an appropriate thing to do. You have a clear statement of what your proposition is. I do think we need a little bit more context that's going on here. You've got 10,000 of juveniles imprisoned in adult facilities, and since this seems like it's generally recognized as being inappropriate, that there is a difference between juvenile and adult facilities, the first question that keeps popping in my head is, why does this happen? Is there a lack of facilities for juveniles and they get bumped into the adult prison facilities? Or is it just that these people have been, these juveniles have been identified as particularly problematic to put in with the other juveniles? Or is it, the crimes that they have been sentenced for? I think there needs to be a little bit more context that's going on here, because the way you describe it, it certainly sounds like you've got a very valid position to take, and I'm not sure why anybody would see that as being something to object to. But apparently they're putting 10,000 of these kids into the adult prison, so there's got to be a reason for that, and it just leaves me uncertain as to why that's going on. Outside of that, though, I thought that you made a very good argument about the potential problems, the increased likelihood of reoffending, the lack of access to resources and facilities, and the difficulty of readjusting afterwards. I do think that you could use a little bit more information about that readjustment. I assume if they're sentenced to adult prisons that there's a period of time that they're in those prisons. If you could add some information about the actual length of sentence, for instance, that might make it easier to figure out whether it is their entrance as juvenile that created the problem for their readjustment, or whether it's the fact that they were in prison for a long period of time. Maybe some comparative data for also between those who served their time in adult prisons versus those who served their time in juvenile facilities. The lack of access of resources is easily documented with the statistic that you had. I thought that was pretty good. Although I do think that you need to show that they have access to these kinds of things in the juvenile facilities, which you didn't really do. You did show that they don't have it in the adult prisons. I'm going, okay, well, do they have it in the juvenile facilities? Because that's the comparison that you're making, and I think that you need a little bit of information on that. A lot of reading in the presentation. You need to be able to talk to us a little bit more. And after that opening example, I thought that there's going to be a little bit more a direct appeal here using, we're not asking you to make a persuasive presentation, but you need to establish some ethos with us, and the story that you give us gives us an emotional hook into the argument, and you need to kind of sell it a little bit more, and it sounds a little perfunctory as the way it's being presented. All right, thank you.